What's going on, Tamers? It's me, Guy, exhausted from Japanese festivals. I went to one of the largest festivals in Tokyo called the Sanja Festival, and while I will say it was a tiring experience because there's a lot to see and a lot to walk through and a lot to eat, it was really cool. In fact, you know what? Check it out for yourself.
They're coming, yeah? Oh, Sienna.
Enough about that. I know you folks are not here for the real life adventures of East. You're here for the 12th week of the BT13 set over here in Japan. And we had a lot of really small events, but we also had a pretty large scale team event that just finished up over the past couple days, and the results were actually really interesting. And while last week we were starting to see decks pick up steam, this week we're going to see them hit their full stride. So let's take a look at a couple of event results, some key takeaways, as well as a close look at some of those decks that topped over the course of last week. So diving right into our results here, you'll probably notice right off the bat that Mirage Galgamon is sharing the throne this week along with Beelzemon and Shine Greymon. All three decks have seen optimizations using the new training cards, where last week I feel like Mirage Galgamon was on the uptick. It feels like this week the deck has been fully optimized and is starting to see big wins, not only in a lot of little events, but it also took a big win as part of the 3-man team that won a 24-man team tournament called the Royal Knights Cup. And right behind them is going to be Blue Flare and War Greymon, strong as always. Now I know every week I have told you guys that Blue Flare is a good deck, but one of the people in the comments a few weeks ago pointed out that I've actually never shown off a Blue Flare list this week, so we're definitely going to take a look at one of those as well. And then as we drop down to the rookie level here, we see lots of decks we've seen before. Again, Chaos Dramon and Machine Dramon. This is a deck that I've been playing for quite a while now, I think the past 3 weeks or so, and I was really optimistic with the addition of the new Raidmon card, as well as the new defense training card to really buff the deck up and make it stronger. But it really feels like just the sheer matchup spreads for this deck, as well as the way that other decks are optimizing, I fall into the same problem that Machine Dramon and Chaos Dramon just cannot keep up. Where in the past I could drop a Chaos Dramon or a Machine Dramon down on the board and that was pretty much GG's for my opponent, nowadays when I drop a Chaos Dramon or a Machine Dramon, that's the beginning of the fight. Like, it has to survive at that point, and that is so hard to do while winning at the same time. Though I'm still really optimistic here. Within the next week here or so, we're going to get access to the new cards from the starter decks that feature ace cards. The black one has a lot of great tools for Machine Dramon and Chaos Dramon, so once that drops, I'm definitely going to retool the deck a little bit and see what we can do with it. But we also see many other strong decks as well, things like Red Hybrid, Royal Knights, Belphemon. Bloom Quartz has actually been on the rise recently. Actually, we're going to cover it probably in next week's video, but as a little bit of a spoiler, today, as of the recording of this video, a guy that I played with on Friday actually won a pretty decent sized event with Bloom Quartz. So really excited to see what his list looked like. But moving on here, we've also got Alphamon. I know a lot of folks last week were really down about the fact there was no Alphamon representation at all, but keep in mind, folks, these are weekly summaries of the meta for Japan. This is not a full summary of all the events that have ever happened. It's week by week. And then finally here at the in-training level, we've got things like Aegis-Dramon, Beelstar, D-Brigade again. Actually, this has popped up, the same D-Brigade list, I believe, from last week. Also popped up again for this week, so maybe there's something to this list. But also Mother D Reaper, which is a surprise. They've taken advantage of like X-Anti-Whitey cards and a couple other things, which is kind of surprising to me, but that deck's still around, as well as Examon. And then also a Vmon Armor win here. What's really interesting about this deck is it features some spice using things like Kazuhama we haven't seen before, so keep an eye out for this one. We're definitely going to take a look at it later. And then to round out the list here, of course, Venusmon and Crossheart. The first list we're going to take a look at today is going to be the Mirage Galgamon list that won that 3v3 team tournament that I talked about before. What's really interesting about this list that we haven't seen before is that it takes the idea of the mulligan in mind when you do the deck building. And I do know that you can build decks differently based on if it's a team event or a single man event. However, I really like the spreads because this deck is focused on one idea, and while it does give up some stuff, I think the deck is very streamlined. If you take a look on the right here, the spreads for the level 3s, 4s, and 5s are a little bit reduced from what we normally see. I think like 12, 10, 8 is like a pretty good split between level 3s, level 4s, and level 5s respectively. In this case, we're going to see 12 level 4s, and in this case, we're going to see 12 level 4s, 9 level... shit. So we're going to see 12 level 3s, 9 level 4s, and only 7 level 5s out of this deck. And that's because, of course, we can mulligan, but on top of that, this deck runs 4 copies of the blue mental training card, as well as 2 copies of the blue memory boost. And combined with the fact that this deck itself just draws a lot for not only the turn player, but also your opponent at the same time, I don't think card draw or finding the cards you need is that big of a problem. We see at the level 3s here, they only run 2 different copies of Galgamon here. They cut the third one, and instead they've opted to run 2 different kinds of floodgates. The Shakomon here, who's fantastic to shut off all of your opponent's training cards, as well as the Madoka Betamon to stop your opponent from gaining memory outside of Tamers. Looking at Beelzemon here. And then for the level 4s, again, we're only running 2 different variations of the Galgamon here, the one from BT13, as well as 4 copies of the one from EX4. And then to round out that, just 1 copy of Ranamon in case you get that last swing for game. From 2 memory coming off of one of your Tom Tamers. The level 5s here are mostly focused on the Mirage Galgamon from BT13, who allows you to gain DP as well as blocker for the turn. What's more important about this card is the fact that the gain DP usually puts you over the limit to get over things like Chaos Dramon or Mugen Dramon, while also allowing you to swing multiple times using its inheritance effect. And then alongside him is going to be that EX4 Maha Galgamon, who lets you bounce a level 4 back to your opponent's hand, which nowadays is actually pretty decent removal. He also gives you the restand ability on inheritance, so either of these guys are going to be able to restand and attack twice, if not more. So yeah, one of the reasons this deck is so strong is because of this inheritance effect from both these guys. And then looking at the top end here, most folks do run a split of the BT13 and BT12 Mirage Galgamon, but in this case, the BT13 one has been cut completely, only running 4 copies of Mirage Galgamon and 3 copies of the Burst Mode here, because you need to make room for all of your Tamers and a surprisingly high amount of Full Moon Meteor Impact. This card is actually really good. As far as removal is concerned, if you're running a deck like Mirage Galgamon that gives your opponent cards in hand, then this kind of removal, which discounts itself based on how many cards your opponents have in hand after you bounce something, is pretty wild. Also, I gotta say that this guy's handle is probably the nastiest thing I've ever seen if you take into account that L and R are interchangeable in Japanese. Blue Flare lovers rejoice. The next list we're going to take a look at is going to be the deck of that namesake, and right off the bat, 4 copies of Sorai, because this card is problematic for a lot of people. Some interesting things about this list specifically is that it only runs 2 copies of the Jamming Male Birdramon, where I think that card is really, really good, and more folks usually have more copies of this in the deck, it's like 3 or 4. It's interesting to see only the inclusion of 2 here. Now, as far as Blue Flare is concerned, I think that most players who build the deck walk one of 2 paths. The first is going to be opting to go the red path, which gives you access to Red Greymon, the one that gives you security attack +1 in inheritance, as well as Metal Greymon X Antibody, who also gives you security attack +1 whenever you digivolve into him. The other route is to swing back to Decker Greymon here. You see, like this guy did here, 2 copies of Decker Dramon at level 4, as well as 2 copies of the Decker Greymon here at level 5, which gives you that coveted armor purge ability for a little bit more defense, a little bit more survivability for your Metal Greymon. A nice little bit of spice in this deck list here is the 4 copies of the Security Bulkomon, where this slot in the level 3s would normally be taken up by things like Floodgates, the Shakomon, or the Madoka Betamon that we saw before in the Mirage Galgamon list. This deck opts to go for just more card draw from the security check of the Bulkomon here. And because Blue Flare is a Digicross based deck that wants to just play down Digimon using the Digicross abilities instead of like playing one and then Digivolving up the chain, this Bulkomon inclusion is actually not a bad idea. If you're playing Blue Flare yourself, I opt you to give it a try. So looking at this last deck list, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, this deck kind of wild. Like, the idea here is not readily apparent if you just look at the cards, but it's after like theory crafting a bit here and like actually looking at how the pieces fit together, it's pretty interesting. I think most folks think that the game plan here is just to go V-Bond and then go into your armor cards and then run them in, Digivolve them into armors again, and then keep running them in. But in this case, it's not exactly that. So of course, that's always an option. It's always on the table. If you want to go fast, you can. But also, the addition of the Mermaid Mon here in this deck is really interesting because you Digivolve into her for 3, you drop a card into its sources, and then you gain 2 memory. So really cheap 1-cost level 5 evolve. And then the idea is to get to Kazuhamon. So once you get to the Kazuhamon here, 2 things happen. The first is that her effect lets you play a level 4 or lower from her sources for free. But in this case, it's probably going to be a level 4. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. Aside from that, you also get to play an option card that's cost 5 or lower from your hand for free. And in this case, that option card is almost always, I can almost always guarantee it's going to be Kaiser Nail. Kaiser Nail is going to let you play another level 4 on the field. Then you can just Joggers to your Chimeramon to get another hit off. Another clever little strategy you can employ here is to use the Kazuhamon's effect to use Kaiser Nail to drop the red Vmon card here. And assuming that you have 2 of the Paladin modes in hand, you can drop one to the trash and then Digivolve your Kazuhamon into the Paladin mode for reduced cost by taking the one that you just dumped into the trash and putting it at the bottom of the deck. But yes, Paladin mode just has that effect. I completely forgot about that. So here's the card for you to read in case you forgot about it as well. And I'll say it again, this build is a little wild, but I love the creativity and the ingenuity here to give the deck the ability to keep pace with some of the faster decks out there that it might have been outpaced by. This kind of eye when it comes to deck building is an important skill that I think all good Digimon players should have. So that'll wrap up the BT13 Week 12 meta report. Now, a lot of interesting things have been happening so far with the addition of the new training cards. Decks are still getting optimized, it feels like, and we do have those new starter decks that feature the new ace cards and the new counter mechanics coming out within the next week. Now, we won't see those in event results until maybe about 2 weeks from now, but keep your eyes open because I think a lot is going to happen. Again, I'm super hopeful for Chaos Dramon because at this point, that's all I can be. Anyways, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.